The train lurched to a stop in Red River, Texas, and Willa Zimmerman pressed her gloved hand against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared at the dusty settlement that would become her new home in this summer of 1878. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, each beat a reminder of the secrets she carried like stones in her pockets, secrets that could destroy the fragile future she was desperately trying to build. The advertisement she had answered 3 months ago promised a fresh start with a rancher named Yates Crawford. But fresh starts were illusions when the past clung to you like shadows at high noon. The conductor announced their arrival, and Willa smoothed down her traveling dress, the dark green fabric already dusty from 2 days of hard travel from Kansas City. She had left behind everything, including the name she had made for herself in the saloons and gambling halls where she had worked as a card dealer and occasional singer. That life seemed like another world now, one she had entered out of desperation after her parents died of fever when she was 19, leaving her with nothing but debts and a survival instinct that had led her down paths she now desperately wanted to forget. The platform was crowded with people meeting loved ones, conducting business and loading supplies. Willa clutched her carpetbag tighter, scanning the faces for someone who might be Yates Crawford. His letters had been brief but kind, his penmanship neat and deliberate. He had described himself as a cattle rancher with a modest spread, a man of 30 who had been too busy building his business to find a wife the traditional way. He had mentioned nothing about requiring perfection, but Willa knew that most men expected their wives to be pure and untainted by the world. She was neither. Miss Zimmerman. The voice was deep and warm, like honey mixed with gravel. Willa turned and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of Texas bluebonnets. He wore clean dungarees, a well-maintained shirt, and a hat that had seen better days but was cared for with obvious attention. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and a slight cleft in his chin. But it was his expression that caught her off guard, something genuine and hopeful that made her chest tighten with guilt. "Mr. Crawford," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yates, please." He smiled, and the gesture transformed his entire face, erasing years of hard work and outdoor living. "I am mighty glad you made it safely. The journey from Kansas City can be rough this time of year." "It was manageable," Willa said, acutely aware of how formal she sounded. She had practiced being refined, being the kind of woman a respectable rancher would want, but standing before him now, the performance felt hollow. Yates reached for her bag, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "My wagon is just over here. I thought we could head to town first, get you settled at the boarding house for tonight. I know the arrangement was for us to marry quickly, but I wanted you to have time to catch your breath, make sure this is what you want." The consideration in his words made Willa's throat tight. In her previous life, men had wanted things from her, taken what they could get. This man was offering her choice, time, respect. It made what she was hiding feel even heavier. "That is very kind of you," she said quietly. They walked to his wagon, a sturdy vehicle that spoke of practicality rather than show. Yates helped her up with a gentle hand, his touch brief and appropriate. As they rolled through the streets of Red River, he pointed out the general store, the church, the schoolhouse, and the saloon. Willa's gaze lingered on the latter, memories flooding back unbidden. She had dealt cards in places just like that, had sung songs that made cowboys weep into their whiskey, had learned to read men's faces for tells and lies. "Not much to look at yet," Yates was saying, "but Red River is growing. More families settling every month. The railroad has made a real difference." "It seems like a good town," Willa offered, and she meant it. The streets were relatively clean, the buildings well maintained. She could see children playing near the schoolhouse, women chatting outside the general store. It was the kind of place she had dreamed about during long nights shuffling cards and avoiding grabbing hands. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patricia Morley, a round woman with kind eyes and flour permanently dusting her apron. She showed Willa to a small but clean room on the second floor, chattering about the town and asking polite questions about Willa's journey. Yates waited downstairs, his hat in his hands, looking almost nervous when Willa descended after freshening up. "I thought we might have supper at the hotel restaurant," he said. "Nothing fancy, but the food is honest and filling." Over plates of roast beef and potatoes, Yates told her about his ranch, the Double C, which he had built from almost nothing over the past 8 years. He spoke with pride but not arrogance, describing the challenges of the land, the cattle he was breeding, his hopes for expansion. Willa found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the work, the seasons, the demands of ranch life. "I will not lie to you, Willa," he said, his blue eyes serious. "It is hard work. I have 3 hands who help, good men, but there is always more to do than hours in the day. I am looking for a partner, not just a housekeeper. Someone who can stand beside me, help build something lasting." "I am not afraid of hard work," Willa said truthfully. She had worked since she was old enough to hold a broom, had taken every job she could find after her parents died. The gambling halls had been a last resort when everything else had fallen through, when she had been 2 days from starvation and willing to do almost anything to survive. "I can see that about you," Yates said softly. "Your letters, they had a quality to them. Honest somehow. Real." The compliment made Willa want to confess everything right there, but fear sealed her lips. What would he think if he knew? Would that warmth in his eyes turn to disgust? Would he send her back on the next train, another failed attempt at redemption? They agreed to spend the next few days getting to know each other before making any final decisions about marriage. Yates was staying at the ranch but rode into town each morning to call on Willa, showing her around, introducing her to shopkeepers and neighbors. Everyone seemed to know and respect him, which only made Willa's deception feel worse. On the 3rd day, he took her out to see the Double C. The ranch was about 5 miles from town, nestled in rolling grassland with a creek running through the property. The house was modest but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen that opened onto a back porch. Everything was neat and orderly, clearly maintained by someone who took pride in what they had built. "I know it is not much," Yates said, watching her face carefully. "But it is mine, and it is honest work." "It is wonderful," Willa breathed, and she meant it. Standing on that porch, looking out at the land stretching toward distant hills, she could almost believe in new beginnings, almost forget the woman who had dealt cards and sang sad songs in smoky rooms. His 3 ranch hands came in for lunch, men who treated Yates with respect and Willa with polite curiosity. They ate at a long table, the conversation easy and punctuated with laughter. This was the life she wanted, Willa realized with startling clarity. Not the performance she had been planning, but this genuine warmth, this sense of building something real. That evening, as Yates drove her back to town, he was quieter than usual. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, too beautiful to be real. "I have enjoyed these past few days," he said finally. "Getting to know you. I know we are still practically strangers, but I feel like there is something real here, something worth building on." Willa's hands twisted in her lap. "Yates, there are things about my past that you should know." He was quiet for a long moment, the wagon wheels creaking in the settling dusk. "We all have pasts, Willa. I have done things I am not proud of, made mistakes, The question is not where we have been, but where we are going. But some things cannot be undone, she pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. Some things change how people see you. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop. They were alone on the road, the town lights visible in the distance. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but not unkind. Are you running from the law? No. Did you hurt someone innocent? No, never. Then whatever it is in the past. I am not looking for a saint, Willa. I am looking for a partner, someone real. Tears pricked at Willa's eyes. I worked in gambling halls. I dealt cards, sang songs. I saw things, did things that proper women would never even speak of. I am not the respectable bride you deserve. The confession hung in the air between them. Willa waited for his face to change, for the warmth to drain from his eyes. Instead, Yates reached out and gently took her hand. Did anyone force you into that life? Circumstances did. My parents died, left me with debts and no prospects. I tried everything else first, but when it was between starving and surviving, I chose to survive. That is nothing to be ashamed of, Yates said firmly. You did what you had to do to live. That takes strength, not weakness. But I am not pure, Willa whispered. I am not what men want in a wife. Yates leaned closer, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. You are what I want, a survivor, someone strong. Someone honest enough to tell me the truth even when it scares her. I do not care about what you had to do to get here, Willa. I only see our future. The words broke something loose in Willa's chest. She had carried her shame like armor, had believed it defined her. But here was this man, this good, honest man, looking at her like she was worth something. Like her past was just that past, and what mattered was who she chose to be now. I do not deserve your kindness, she managed through tears. That is not for you to decide, Yates said gently. We all deserve second chances, fresh starts. That is why you came here, is it not? To begin again, Willa nodded, unable to speak. Then let us begin. No more shame, no more hiding, just two people trying to build something good. The wedding took place 5 days later at the small church in Red River. Willa wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Morley helped her select, and Yates wore his best suit, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal clothing. The ceremony was small, attended by Yates's ranch hands, Mrs. Morley and a few of his friends from town. The minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Thomas, spoke about new beginnings and the sanctity of partnership. When Yates slipped the simple gold band on her finger, Willa felt the weight of it like a promise. This was real. This was her life now. Whatever came next, she would face it as Mrs. Crawford, partner to a good man, builder of a future she had once thought impossible. The ranch hands had decorated the house with wildflowers, a gesture that touched Willa deeply. There was a small celebration, with food and even some music when one of the hands produced a harmonica. As the sun set and their guests departed, Willa and Yates found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. Are you nervous? Yates asked softly. They were standing on the back porch watching the stars emerge. Yes, Willa admitted, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm afraid I will wake up and this will all have been a dream. It is real, Yates promised. He took her hand, his touch warm and solid. And we will take everything at whatever pace feels right. There is no rush. We have time to learn each other. That first night, they simply talked. Yates told her about his childhood in Tennessee, how his family had lost everything in the war, how he had come west to make a new start. Willa shared more about her parents, the happy years before the fever, her mother's love of gardens, her father's terrible singing voice. They laughed and shared comfortable silences, and when they finally went to bed, Yates held her gently, asking nothing more than her presence beside him. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Willa threw herself into ranch life, learning quickly and working tirelessly. She tended the vegetable garden, helped with the chickens, learned to cook for the ranch hands. Yates taught her to ride properly, to read the signs of weather changing, to understand the rhythms of cattle and land. But it was the small moments that built their love. Morning coffee shared on the porch before the work began. Yates reading aloud from the newspaper while Willa mended clothes. The way he always asked her opinion, treating her thoughts as valuable. How he would sometimes come up behind her while she was cooking and gently kiss her temple before heading out to work. They grew closer gradually, naturally. Yates was patient and tender, never demanding, always asking. When they finally came together as husband and wife fully, it was nothing like Willa's experiences in her past life. This was gentle, mutual, full of care and growing love. Afterwards, lying in Yates's arms, Willa finally understood the difference between existing and living. About 2 months after the wedding, trouble arrived in the form of a stranger. Willa was in town buying supplies when she saw him, a man from her past life in Kansas City. His name was Marcus Dillon, a gambler who had frequented the hall where she had worked. He was standing outside the saloon, and when his eyes found hers, recognition flashed across his face. Willa's blood went cold. She quickly finished her business and headed for the wagon, but Marcus intercepted her. "Well, well," he drawled, his smile oily. "If it is not Willa the songbird. Last I heard you had disappeared, and here you are playing respectable lady." "I am a respectable lady," Willa said firmly, though her hands shook. "My past is none of your concern." Marcus laughed. "Does your husband know what kind of woman he married?" "I bet he would be real interested to hear some stories." "I have told him everything," Willa said, lifting her chin. "He knows who I was and he does not care." "Everything?" Marcus leaned closer, his breath stale with whiskey. "Does he know about that poker game? The one where you helped Dutch Eddie cheat Anderson out of his ranch? That was a mighty fine piece of work." The accusation hit Willa like a physical blow. "I never cheated anyone. I dealt honest games. That is not how I remember it. And I wonder how the fine people of this town would feel about having a card cheat in their midst." Before Willa could respond, a strong hand gripped Marcus's shoulder and spun him around. Yates stood there, his face calm but his eyes dangerous. "I believe my wife asked you to leave her alone," Yates said quietly. Marcus sized up Yates and apparently decided discretion was wise. "Just catching up with an old friend. No harm meant." "There will be harm if you bother her again," Yates said. It was not a threat, just a statement of fact. "Now move along." Marcus raised his hands and backed away, but his parting look promised this was not over. Willa sagged against the wagon, her legs suddenly weak. "Are you all right?" Yates asked, his anger immediately replaced by concern. "He was lying," Willa said quickly. "About the cheating, Yates, I swear I never cheated anyone. I dealt honest games. It was the only integrity I had left." "I know," Yates said simply. "I can see it in your eyes. You are not a cheat. But he is going to talk. He is going to spread rumors. Let him. Anyone who knows you will know they are lies." But Willa knew how small towns worked. Rumors could destroy reputations, ruin lives. That evening, she and Yates talked long into the night. She told him every detail she could remember about her time in Kansas City, about the games she had dealt, the people she had known. She had never cheated, had in fact refused several offers to do so, which was part of why she had never made much money despite her skill. "The man he mentioned, Anderson, I remember that game," Willa said. "I dealt it, but I dealt it straight. Dutch Eddie was just a better player. If there was cheating, I did not know about it." "Then we will face this together," Yates said firmly. "No more shame, remember, you did nothing wrong." The next few days were difficult. Marcus apparently did start talking because people began giving Willa strange looks in town. Whispers followed her. Mrs. Morley remained staunchly supportive, but Willa could feel the weight of judgment settling over her like a shroud. Then, unexpectedly, help came from an unlikely source. A well-dressed man arrived in Red River asking questions about Dutch Eddie and the Anderson game. His name was Thomas Anderson, and he was the son of the man who had lost his ranch. But he was not looking to accuse Willa. Instead, he was gathering evidence against Dutch Eddie, who had apparently cheated several men and was now facing legal troubles. Anderson sought out Willa at the ranch. Yates stayed close, protective, but willing to hear the man out. "Miss Zimmerman, or Mrs. Crawford, I should say," Anderson began. "I have been investigating Eddie's operation for months. I have spoken to dozens of people, and your name keeps coming up, but always in the same way, as the one honest dealer in a crooked house." Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "I tried to be. It seemed like the least I could do. I have statements from multiple sources confirming that you refused to participate in cheating schemes, even when it cost you money. I am here to ask if you would be willing to make a statement about what you witnessed. It could help put Eddie away and clear the names of several people he implicated." Willa looked at Yates, who nodded encouragement. "I will tell you everything I know," she said. Over the next few hours, Willa gave a detailed account of her time working for Eddie, the propositions she had refused, the suspicious games she had observed but had not participated in. Anderson took careful notes, his respect for her clearly growing. "You had integrity in a place where it was not valued," he said finally. "That takes real character." Before he left, Anderson asked if he could speak to some of the townspeople to set the record straight about Willa's reputation. With her permission, he did just that, talking to the minister, the shopkeepers, even placing a notice in the local newspaper clarifying the facts of the case. Marcus Dillon left town quickly after that, apparently realizing his lies had been exposed. And slowly, carefully, the town's perception of Willa began to change. Instead of seeing a fallen woman, people began to see someone who had survived difficult circumstances with her integrity intact. Mrs. Morley became her vocal champion, and other women began to reach out with friendliness rather than judgment. "You see," Yates said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, "the truth always finds its way out." "I was so scared," Willa admitted. "I thought I would lose everything, lose you." "Never," Yates said firmly. He pulled her close and she nestled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I meant what I said, Willa. I only see our future. Everything before was just the path that led you to me." As autumn painted the Texas landscape in golds and reds, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she was too sick to make breakfast, and Mrs. Morley, visiting with eggs from her chickens, took one look at her and smiled knowingly. "You have that look about you," the older woman said kindly. "When are you going to tell that husband of yours?" Willa told Yates that evening. He was working on fixing a fence post, his shirt dusty and his face streaked with sweat. She brought him water, and as he drank, she simply said, "We are going to need another bedroom." He looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. The water cup fell from his hands as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Yates treated Willa like she was made of glass, constantly worrying and fussing. She found it endearing even when it was frustrating. The ranch hands built a cradle, and the women of the town, now fully accepting of Willa, threw her a small party, bringing baby clothes and advice. Their son was born on a clear March morning in 1879. The birth was long and difficult, but when Willa finally held the squalling infant, all the pain vanished. Yates was beside himself with joy and terror, holding his son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "What should we name him?" Willa asked, exhausted but happy. "What about William?" Yates suggested. After your father, the gesture touched Willa deeply. They had talked about her parents, and Yates always spoke of them with respect. "William Crawford," she said softly. "It is perfect." Young William was a demanding baby, but Willa had never been happier. She watched Yates transform into a devoted father, carrying the baby around while doing chores, talking to him about cattle and land as though the infant understood. The ranch continued to prosper, and they hired another hand to help with the increased work. When William was 6 months old, Willa received a letter that changed everything again. It was from a lawyer in Kansas City, informing her that Dutch Eddie had been convicted and sentenced to prison. More surprisingly, several men whom Eddie had cheated, including Thomas Anderson's father, had set up a fund to compensate people who had worked in Eddie's establishment, but had not been part of his criminal activities. Because of Willa's testimony and her proven integrity, she was entitled to a significant sum. "This is incredible," Yates said, reading the letter over her shoulder. "This money could help us expand the ranch, maybe buy that adjoining land we have been eyeing. Or we could save it for William's future," Willa said. "Make sure he has opportunities we never had." They decided to do both, using part of the money to buy additional grazing land and saving the rest for their son's education. The expansion was successful, and the Double C became one of the more prosperous ranches in the area. But more than the financial success, it was the clearing of Willa's name that mattered most. The letter included a formal statement from the court acknowledging her honesty and her refusal to participate in criminal activity. Yates had it framed and hung in their bedroom, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that truth and integrity mattered. 2 years later, Willa gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace. The birth was easier than William's had been, and Yates was slightly less terrified the second time around, though he still paced outside like a nervous cat until the midwife called him in. Their family was complete, and the ranch house rang with the sounds of children. William was a serious child, already following his father around and asking endless questions about cattle. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief. Willa had never imagined this kind of happiness was possible. One evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Willa and Yates sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was soft with the promise of spring. "Do you ever think about your old life?" Yates asked. It was a question he had never posed before, and Willa considered it carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with longing, more like remembering a story I once heard about someone else. That woman who dealt cards and sang in saloons, she feels like a stranger to me now." "She was not a stranger," Yates said gently. "She was you doing what she had to do to survive, and she was brave and strong just like you are now." "I spent so long being ashamed," Willa said softly, "thinking that my past made me unworthy of good things, unworthy of love. And now I know that shame is just another form of prison, and you gave me the key to escape it." Yates took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "We freed each other," he said. "I was so focused on building, on working, I had forgotten how to really live. You taught me that." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of true partnership. Inside, one of the twins started crying, and they both smiled, knowing the peace was temporary. "Our future," Willa said, standing to go tend to their daughter. It turned out even better than I imagined. It is only beginning, Yates replied, following her inside. The years continued to unfold with the rhythm of ranch life. William grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's work ethic and his mother's quick mind. He showed an aptitude for business that surprised everyone, keeping meticulous records of the ranch's operations even as a young boy. The twins were as different as night and day despite their identical faces. Emma was thoughtful and loved books, often found reading under trees when she was supposed to be doing chores. Grace was fearless, learning to ride before she could barely walk and declaring she would be a rancher like her father. The Double C continued to prosper under Yates and Willa's joint management. Willa proved to have a head for figures, managing the ranch's finances with the same careful attention she had once given to card games. She also started a small business raising chickens and selling eggs in town, which grew into a profitable side enterprise. But more than their business success, it was their marriage that flourished. Each year seemed to deepen their connection, building layers of shared experience and love. They had their disagreements, of course. Yates could be stubborn about his methods, and Willa sometimes pushed too hard for changes. But they had learned to talk through their differences, to value each other's perspectives. When William turned 10, Willa suggested they start hosting gatherings for other ranching families. She had noticed that many of the smaller ranchers struggled with the isolation and the constant challenges of the work. The gatherings became monthly events where families would come together to share meals, swap advice, and build community. It was at one of these gatherings that Willa realized how far she had come. She was standing in her kitchen, surrounded by women she now called friends, laughing about some mishap with a stubborn cow. These women knew her story, the full truth of where she had come from, and they valued her anyway. Not despite her past, but as a complete person whose experiences made her who she was. Mrs. Morley, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, caught Willa's eye and raised her coffee cup in a small toast. The gesture said everything. You made it. You belong here. You are home. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Yates found Willa sitting on their porch step looking up at the stars. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her. "Happy," she corrected. "I was just thinking about the day I arrived in Red River, how terrified I was. How certain I was that my past would destroy any chance at a real future. And instead I found you, found this life, found out that redemption is not about erasing who you were, but about growing into who you can be." Yates wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You know what I see when I look at you." "What?" "The bravest person I have ever met. Someone who survived things that would have broken other people. Someone who chose honesty over comfort. Someone who builds things, good things, lasting things." "I see that in you too," Willa said softly. "You took a chance on a stranger with a complicated past. You chose to see the best in me when I could not see it myself. We were what each other needed," Yates said simply. "Two people trying to build something real in a world that can be pretty harsh." As if to prove his point, a coyote howled in the distance, its cry lonely and wild. But here on their porch, with Yates's warmth beside her and her children sleeping safely inside, Willa felt only peace. The challenges continued, of course. This was still the wild Texas frontier, where drought, disease, and difficulty were constant companions. There was the year when fever swept through the cattle, and they lost nearly a third of their herd. Willa worked alongside Yates and the hands, nursing sick animals and trying to contain the spread. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work, but they got through it together. There was the summer when William, at 12, got thrown from a horse and broke his arm badly. Willa held her terrified son while the doctor set the bone, singing the same lullabies she had once performed in saloons, now given new purpose and meaning. Yates sat beside them, his face pale but his presence steady, and William later said that knowing his parents were there made the pain bearable. There was the winter when the twins came down with pneumonia simultaneously, and Willa and Yates took turns sitting up with them through long, frightening nights. Both girls recovered, but the experience reminded them how fragile life could be, how precious every moment was. Through it all, their love continued to deepen. They developed their own language of glances and small gestures. Yates knew that when Willa got very quiet, she was working through a problem and needed space. Willa knew that when Yates got overly busy with work, he was worried about something and needed to talk. They learned to read each other's moods and needs, to support without smothering, to give space while staying connected. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Willa with a trip to San Antonio. They left the children with Mrs. Morley and the ranch hands and took 3 days just for themselves. It was the first time they had been alone together since before William was born. In San Antonio, they stayed in a real hotel with a restaurant and everything. Yates took her to dinner, to shops, even to see a traveling theatrical performance. But the best moments were the simple ones, walking along the river, talking without interruption, remembering who they had been when they first met and marveling at who they had become. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked one evening as they watched the sunset from a park bench. Yates thought about it seriously. "I regret that we cannot go back and give that 19-year-old girl who lost her parents an easier path, but I do not regret anything that brought us together. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are. They taught us what matters." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Yates Crawford, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. And I love you, Willa Crawford, my partner, my best friend, the only future I ever want to see." When they returned home, William had kept meticulous notes about the ranch's activities, and the twins had made them welcome home signs decorated with somewhat lopsided flowers. The house felt like it might burst with love, and Willa realized that this right here, was everything she had ever wanted without knowing it was possible to want it. As the years continued to pass, their children grew into remarkable young people. William, at 16, was already managing significant portions of the ranch's operations. He had his father's steady nature, but also his mother's ability to see possibilities. He started suggesting innovations, like improving their breeding stock and negotiating better prices for their cattle. Yates listened to his son's ideas with pride and implemented many of them. The twins, at 14, were becoming their own people. Emma had become the unofficial teacher's assistant at the local school, her love of learning inspiring younger children. She talked about maybe becoming a teacher herself someday, or even going to college, which was still unusual for women but becoming more possible. Grace had her heart set on ranching, working alongside William and their father with a determination that made Willa smile. She saw so much of her own fierce survivor's spirit in her daughter. One afternoon, Emma came home from school with a troubled expression. Over supper, she finally spoke up. "Mama, today in town, I heard Mrs. Roberts talking about you. She was telling someone new in town about your past." Willa's stomach clenched, old fears rising. But before she could respond, Emma continued. "She told them how you survived terrible circumstances with your integrity intact, how you helped put a criminal in prison, how you have been one of the best things to happen to Red River, always helping people and building community. She said you were an example of true strength." Willa felt tears sting her eyes. The story of her past had been transformed from a source of shame into something else entirely, a testament to survival and redemption. "Mrs. Roberts is very kind," Willa managed. "Is it true, though," Grace asked, "that you dealt cards in gambling halls?" Willa looked at Yates, who nodded encouragingly. They had always planned to tell the children the full truth when they were old enough to understand. "Yes, it is true," Willa said. "After my parents died, I had no money and no prospects. I tried to find respectable work, but there was not any to be had. So I took a job dealing cards because it was that or starve. I am not proud of it, but I am not ashamed anymore either. I did what I had to do to survive." "That is brave," William said seriously. "You did not give up." "But did you really refuse to cheat even when it would have made you money?" Emma asked. "I did. It was important to me to maintain at least that much integrity. It was all I felt I had left of who I was raised to be." Grace grinned. "That is very you, Mama. Stubborn about doing the right thing even when it is hard." The conversation continued, with the children asking questions and Willa answering honestly. She told them about meeting their father, about his immediate acceptance and support, about learning that her past did not have to define her future. "I want you all to understand something," Yates said when the discussion wound down. "Your mother is the strongest, bravest person I have ever known. She survived things that would have broken most people, and she did it with her core self intact. Never let anyone make you think less of her, and never think less of yourselves for coming from strong stock." The children nodded, their respect and love for both parents clear in their eyes. That night, Willa reflected on how different this conversation would have been if she had married someone else, someone who was ashamed of her past. Her children were growing up knowing that strength came in many forms, that survival was nothing to apologize for, that redemption was always possible. As William approached 18, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Sarah, who shared his interest in improving ranching techniques. Willa watched her son navigate this new relationship with a wisdom beyond his years, treating Sarah with respect and genuine interest. She knew that William had learned from watching his parents' partnership, had absorbed the lessons of mutual respect and honest communication. The year William turned 19, he and Sarah married in the same church where Willa and Yates had exchanged vows 2 decades earlier. Standing in that church, watching her son promise his life to his chosen partner, Willa was overwhelmed with gratitude. This young man, this good man, had grown up seeing love modeled in a healthy way. He knew his mother's full story, and it had not diminished his respect for her. Instead, it had taught him that people were complex, that grace mattered, that love meant accepting the whole person. After the wedding, as the celebration continued, Yates found Willa standing alone for a moment, watching the dancers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that terrified woman who stepped off the train in Red River 21 years ago. About how she could never have imagined this. Any of this. She was brave enough to take a chance. We both were," Willa corrected. "You took as big a risk as I did, choosing to marry a stranger, choosing to accept her complicated past." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said simply. He held out his hand. "Dance with me." They moved onto the floor, joining the other couples. After all these years, they fit together perfectly, knowing instinctively how to move with each other. Willa rested her head against Yates's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the strength of his arms around her. "I only see our future," Yates murmured, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "Always have, always will." "What do you see?" Willa asked, smiling. "Grandchildren, many, many grandchildren, growing old together on our porch, watching our family continue to grow and thrive. Building on everything we started." "That sounds perfect," Willa said, and it was perfect in its imperfect, real way. Sarah and William built a house on the far end of the Double C property, staying close but establishing their own space. Within 2 years, they gave Willa and Yates their first grandchild, a little girl they named Lillian. Holding that baby, seeing her son as a father, Willa felt the circle of life completing in the most beautiful way. Emma did go to college, one of the first women from Red River to do so. She studied literature and education, then returned to establish a proper school in town, bringing new teaching methods and a passion for learning that transformed the community. She eventually married a lawyer from Austin who supported her work and shared her intellectual curiosity. Grace, true to her word, became a rancher. She married a cowboy named Jack who worked for a neighboring spread, and together they bought land adjoining the Double C, expanding the family's holdings. Grace ran her operation with an iron will and a good heart, earning respect throughout the region. As Willa and Yates moved into their 50s, they gradually handed over more of the ranch's daily operations to William and Grace, though neither could quite stop working entirely. Yates still rode out to check on cattle most days, and Willa still managed the chicken operation and kept the books. But they also made more time for each other. Morning coffee on the porch became sacred, an hour where they simply sat together and watched the world wake up. They took walks in the evening, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. They had long since run out of new stories to tell each other, but they never ran out of things to say. When Willa turned 53, she realized with a start that she had now lived more of her life as Mrs. Crawford than she had as the woman she was before. Her time in the gambling halls felt like ancient history, a few years in a long life rather than the defining feature of her existence. "You know what I realized today," she told Yates that evening. "I have been happy longer than I was sad. I have been loved longer than I was alone. This life, our life, it is not the exception anymore. It is just my life." "As it should be," Yates said, "though I hope you know you were always worthy of this, even when you could not see it." "I know it now," Willa said. "Finally, completely, I know it." They were sitting on their porch, as they had thousands of times before. But this time, they were surrounded by family. William and Sarah were there with their 3 children. Emma had brought her husband and their twin boys. Grace and Jack were teaching their young son to throw a rope. The yard was full of laughter and noise and life. Mrs. Morley, now 90 and frail but still sharp, sat in the best rocking chair, surveying the scene with satisfaction. She had been at Willa's first night in Red River, had championed her through the difficult times, had celebrated every triumph. She caught Willa's eye and winked. "You did good, girl," the old woman called out. "Built yourself a real legacy." "We did good," Willa called back, indicating Yates. "Could not have done it alone." As the sun set and the family gathered for supper, Willa found herself thinking about that train ride so long ago. The frightened woman clutching her secrets, sure that her past would destroy any chance at happiness. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, what would she say? That love was real. That redemption was possible. That shame was a cage you could choose to leave. That the right partner would not just accept your past, but would help you see it as part of your strength rather than your weakness. That the words, "I only see our future," could be a promise that sustained you through decades. Later that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Willa and Yates prepared for sleep. It was a comfortable routine, built over years. Yates checked the doors while Willa extinguished the lamps. They moved around each other easily. 2 people who knew every step of this dance in bed. Yates pulled Willa close, and she settled into his embrace as naturally as breathing. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me. For giving me the space to become who I was meant to be." "You gave me the same gift," Yates replied. I was just working, just existing before you came. You taught me how to really live." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had taken a chance on love and built something beautiful from it. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Mrs. Morley passed away peacefully in her sleep at 92, and the whole town mourned the loss of one of its pillars. Willa spoke at the funeral about the kindness Mrs. Morley had shown her from the very first day, how that kindness had been a lifeline when she needed it most. There were more grandchildren, 8 in total, and eventually great-grandchildren. The Double C continued to prosper, now a family operation spanning 3 generations. William proved to be an even better rancher than his father, while Grace's spread became known throughout Texas for its quality cattle. Willa published a small book of advice for women starting over, drawing on her own experiences. It was not widely distributed, but the women who found it said it changed their lives. She received letters from women all over the country, thanking her for her honesty, for showing that past mistakes did not have to define future possibilities. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. There were now so many children and grandchildren that they had to hold the party outdoors. Yates gave a speech, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. 40 years ago, I sent away for a mail-order bride because I was too busy to court properly. I thought I was getting a housekeeper and a partner for the ranch. What I got was so much more. I got a best friend, a true partner. Someone who challenged me and supported me and loved me even when I was being stubborn. Willa, you made my life rich in every way that matters. Here is to 40 more years. Everyone cheered, though they all knew 40 more years was unlikely at their age, but the sentiment was clear. Whatever time they had left, they would spend it together. As Willa and Yates moved into their 70s, they slowed down considerably. Yates's joints ached from decades of hard work, and Willa's eyes were not what they used to be. But they were still themselves, still taking their morning coffee together, still finishing each other's sentences, still holding hands whenever they walked. One spring morning, when Willa was 75 and Yates was 77, they sat on their porch watching the sunrise. The ranch was quiet, everyone else still sleeping. It was just the two of them and the land they had built a life on. "You remember what you told me that first week?" Willa asked, "when I confessed about my past." "I said a lot of things," Yates replied, though his smile suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "You said you only saw our future, not my past, not my shame, just our future together. And I meant it, every word." "It was the most important thing anyone ever said to me," Willa said softly. "It gave me permission to forgive myself, to move forward instead of being trapped in what had been." "You gave yourself permission," Yates corrected gently. "I just held up a mirror so you could see what I saw, someone brave and strong and deserving of every good thing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky lighten. Somewhere in the house, a baby started crying, one of the great-grandchildren staying over. They heard movement as someone went to tend to the child. "We did good, did we not?" Willa said. "Built something lasting." "We did extraordinary," Yates agreed. "And it all started with you being brave enough to step off that train, even though you were terrified. And you being kind enough to see past what I had been to what I could become. What you always were," Yates said firmly. "I did not change you, Willa. I just loved you." "That changed everything," Willa whispered. Yates squeezed her hand. They sat there as the sun rose fully, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors. Inside, their family was waking up, starting another day. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all part of the legacy they had built together. It was a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love. of second chances, of proving that where you came from mattered less than where you chose to go, of showing that shame could be released, that forgiveness was possible, that redemption was real. As they finally rose to start their day, Yates held Willa's hand a moment longer. "I love you," he said simply. "Then, now, always." "I love you too," Willa replied. "Thank you for our future. Thank you for everything." They walked into the house together, ready to face whatever the day would bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it side by side, just as they always had, just as they always would. The months and years that followed continued in much the same rhythm, filled with the simple joys of family, the satisfaction of work well done, and the deep comfort of a love that had weathered everything life could throw at it. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, mourned losses and rejoiced in new births, and through it all, remained devoted to each other. When Yates fell ill in his 79th year, Willa nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to every challenge in their life together. The doctor said his heart was simply wearing out after so many decades of hard work. Yates was resigned, even peaceful about it, but Willa was not ready to let go. "We were supposed to have more time," she said one evening, sitting beside his bed. "We have had 42 years, Yates replied weakly. "That is more than most people get, more than I ever dreamed possible. It is not enough." "It never would have been," Yates said gently. He reached for her hand, his grip not as strong as it once was, but still warm, still real. "But listen, Willa, you need to promise me something, anything. Do not go back to that place of shame and regret when I am gone. Remember what we built. Remember that you are loved and valued. Remember that you deserve every good thing." "I will remember," Willa promised through tears. "How could I forget? You spent 42 years making sure I knew it." Yates smiled. "Good. That was always my most important job." He lived another 3 months, long enough to see one more spring on the ranch he loved. He passed peacefully one morning with Willa beside him, his last words a simple, "I love you." The grief was immense, a physical weight that made breathing difficult, but Willa had learned over the years that she was stronger than she looked. She had survived worse than this, though nothing had hurt quite as much as losing her partner, her best friend, the man who had seen her true self and loved what he saw. The funeral was enormous, attended by what seemed like half of Texas. Ranchers and townspeople, old friends and family, all came to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and died surrounded by love. William gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's strength, his fairness, his devotion to family. But he ended with a tribute to his parents' partnership. "My father always said that marrying my mother was the best decision he ever made, but I think it was more than that. They made each other better. They built something together that was greater than either of them alone. And they showed all of us what real love looks like: patient, kind, forgiving, lasting." After the funeral, after everyone had left, Willa stood alone at the gravesite. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those impossible Texas colors. She thought about that first sunset she had watched with Yates, how he had promised her a future when she could not see one for herself. "Thank you," she whispered to the grave, to the sky, to the memory of the man who had changed her life. "For everything. For seeing me. For loving me. For giving me our future." The years that followed were different, but not empty. Willa was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren who loved her deeply. She continued to live at the ranch house, though William's family moved in to keep her company and help with the property. She spent her days with the great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the old days, about survival and second chances. She also wrote more, her advice book for women finding a wider audience. She received letters from all over the country, from women trapped in difficult circumstances who found hope in her story. She answered every letter personally, sharing what wisdom she had gained from a life fully lived. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, the family held a celebration in Yates's memory. They gathered on the ranch, all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a small army of people who existed because two strangers had taken a chance on each other in 1878. Grace stood up to speak, her weathered face so like her father's. "Mama, you and Daddy built something incredible here, not just this ranch but this family. This legacy of love and acceptance and hard work, we all carry that forward." Emma added, "You taught us that our past does not define us, that we can choose who we become. That love is not about perfection but about seeing someone fully and choosing them anyway." William raised his glass. "To Mama and Daddy, to love that lasts beyond death, to the future they gave us." Everyone drank, and then the party continued, full of laughter and music and life. Willa sat in the middle of it all, watching her legacy unfold before her, and felt Yates's presence as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. That night, lying in the bed she had shared with him for 42 years, Willa talked to him as she often did now. "We did good, Yates, just like you said. We built something lasting, something real. And I am not ashamed anymore, not of my past, not of anything. You taught me that. You gave me that gift." She could almost hear his response, that deep, warm voice saying what he always had. "I only see our future." "Well, my future is not as long as it used to be," Willa said with a smile. "But whatever time I have left, I will spend it honoring what we built, loving our family, helping others find the same hope you gave me." And she did exactly that. Willa lived another 5 years, active and engaged until the very end. She continued writing, continued counseling women who needed guidance, continued being the matriarch of a large and loving family. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at 82, surrounded by family, it felt like a completion rather than a tragedy. She had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than she found it. They buried her next to Yates under the big oak tree on the property, the one where they used to sit and watch the cattle graze. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a shared inscription chosen by their children. They saw each other fully and chose love. Years later, when one of the great-great-grandchildren asked about the strange inscription, William's daughter explained, "Your great-great-grandmother came from difficult circumstances. She had a past she was ashamed of. But great-great-grandfather Yates looked past all of that. He saw who she really was, and he loved her unconditionally. They built this entire family on that foundation of acceptance and love. That is why we are all here, because two people chose to see the best in each other." The child thought about this. "So they were brave." "The bravest," came the reply. "They chose love when it would have been easier to choose judgment. They chose to build a future instead of dwelling on the past, and they taught us all to do the same." The Double C Ranch continued for generations, passed down through William's line and Grace's line, a family operation that bore the marks of its founders in every fence post and cattle brand. But more than the physical legacy, what lasted was the lesson they had taught. That people were more than their worst moments. That redemption was real. That love, real love, looked past imperfections and chose partnership anyway. In the town of Red River, Texas, the story of Willa and Yates Crawford became something of a local legend. The mail-order bride who had been afraid of her past, and the cowboy who said he only saw their future. It was a story told to encourage young couples, to remind people that everyone deserved second chances, to prove that true love was not about perfection, but about acceptance. And somewhere in whatever comes after, two souls rested easy, knowing they had made the most of the chance they had been given. They had taken fear and turned it into courage, shame into strength, loneliness into love. They had built something beautiful and lasting, and that legacy would continue long after their names were forgotten. But in the hearts of their descendants, in the values they had instilled in the very land they had worked, Willa and Yates Crawford lived on. Forever partners, forever in love. Forever proof that the best thing anyone can offer another person is to see them fully, accept them completely, and choose to build a future together. Their story ended not with death, but with continuation. Every happy marriage in their family line. Every child taught to value integrity over reputation. Every person who learned that their past did not have to define their future. All of it traced back to a frightened woman stepping off a train and a kind man who looked at her and saw not shame, but possibility. Not past, but future. Not a fallen woman, but a survivor worthy of love and respect. And in the end, that made all the difference.